All right, welcome to the Capital Finders podcast. My name is Mike, founder of the company. And today with a special guest, we have James Briscall, who, my gosh, what hasn't James done? He apparently pony trekked through Mongolia eating yak meat. He's been to Papua New Guinea with the headhunters. He's originally a bluesman from Birmingham, England, somewhere like that. But he went over to the States, Kent, England. Went over to the States, did a tour there of all the great blues cities.
Yep.
And somehow, James, you ended up in New Zealand, and you are one of the world's premier closers. And for those of you who are not sure what a closer is, that's a specialized skill set within the sales and presentation realm of being able to close deals. That's the person who actually gets things signed off. And there's a whole big skill set behind all that. And James is one of the best I've ever seen at it. So I asked him to be here today and talk a little bit because, as y'all know, the whole purpose of these podcasts is to help you get some of the tools and some of the thoughts for how to stand out, how to get more funding for your business, and how to be more visible. So James, I guess we'd like to open with some questions that have been pre-submitted here. First one is, how in the world did you not become a famous blues artist? I mean, you're pretty darn good.
How did I not become one? Well, basically, unfortunately, Mike, I followed the route my dad did. So a quick story here. Back in the 60s, he was on a committee of a club down in Margate, which at the time was a thriving place for weekend place for Londoners, and there was this theme park there, and there was a club there too, and that club was one of the biggest ones in Kent for bringing the named acts down, and so here she was responsible for bringing down a lot of those acts, like the Everly Brothers, the Stones, the Who. He never got the Beatles there. But what they also did was they were one of the first ones to have the DJ concept too, and that was his passion. His brother's passion was drumming in bands, and his brother was a well-known jazz drummer. Both of them turned their back on their music to go into what was then the company firm, the company business. And although I never intended to, and I never followed their steps into the company business, I actually turned my back on doing a lot of playing and to become a more responsible person in my mid-20s. So that was why I never became that world-famous blues player.
So what did you learn from the field of music? I mean, that's a business where you really have to work pretty hard to get visible enough to be able to make a living at it and get your bookings. What from that have you applied to your closing career?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question, Mike, and I've never been asked that. But I think what actually took me over to the States to tour around to those cities and play in those clubs was really what took the Stones there too. And that was to reconnect. So the Stones I'm sure you've read those interviews with Mick and Keith and whatnot, and they would say that they would buy those vinyls by Howling Wolf and Robert Johnson and Muddy Waters. That was what started them playing. And then obviously when they did their first few tours, or the first tour of the States, they went around to these smaller venues. And the story goes that they were in Sun Records studios, and Muddy Waters was either sweeping the floors or painting the walls, depending on which story Keith is telling at the time. But for them it was the stories, and that is really why I went over to the States, to connect with the heartlands, so to speak, to see to do the same as them, to connect the stories and the places to the vinyl, and really see where the lyrics came from, and really to smell the air and feel the sweat. And that really is one of my passions, and that's what I draw through, or put into all my work, Mike, is the essence of story. And be that a marketing campaign, be it developing an avatar, writing copy, or in coaching, or indeed on a sales call. It's being able to connect with people and allowing them to tell their story. And as we all know, music is one of the most powerful ways where people connect and tell their stories.
So, how would you recommend today's entrepreneurs, particularly with all the lockdowns that are still in place? You were just talking about, hearing the music and smelling the sweat and breathing the air. So many of our entrepreneurs and early stage companies are just kind of in an office by themselves, working out of their home these days. And
Yeah.
how do they make connections? How do they get seen? How do they get heard?
That's a great question, Mike. And one of the things I've found out by speaking to so many founders and founders really, and in many business owners, is I always ask this question: who is your perfect client? And what I've heard so many times is, yeah, well, it's sort of maybe a man or a woman, and they're 35 to 50 or 20 to 40, and they're sort of this and this and that. And there's not many people actually drill down. And I really learned a lot about this from my first mentor, Eben Pagan, who was one of the forefathers of online marketing, along with Frank Kern and Jeff Walker. And for me, being locked down and not being able to maybe physically meet people is actually the perfect time to really work on your avatar, work on your perfect client, work on their demographics, their psychographics, and what their challenges are. And then to be able to write them a copy, and then to actually attract people to you through writing the copy, through really optimizing your offer. So rather than going out there and more like chasing or attending events, I feel that this is really a time to begin to really optimize on how to attract your perfect client.
That's good advice. So, someone is developing their avatar and thinking about who they're trying to attract. What are some other things people should be working on
within that field, or as well as that?
I don't know. You're a high level closer, and people come to you looking for help now. But what was your journey? How did you go from being in the wilds of New Zealand to having people all over the world calling you looking for you to help them?
Well, I mean, the first thing which we've all heard so many times is to find a mentor. So I found my first mentor, Eben Pagan. He allowed me, or I embraced his approach to writing copy and marketing, and also coaching and self-development. Like a lot of people in the coaching and self-development arena, I was, what can I say, the world's best coach, which nobody knew of. I obviously wasn't, but it's a very common thing for people to be a very, very good coach, but not have the sales experience, or not have not knowing how to start in sales. So coaching is often a referrals business for the majority, which is why it remains not as revenue generating as it could be. So I then found a sales mentor, and that really started my journey on understanding how to communicate with people during a sales call. And so I would, for me, so I mentioned that one big thing I've always noticed is the lack of definition, the lack of clarity, the lack of nicheness in the avatar, the perfect client. And the second thing is the sales process, what I call the sales architecture. So that for me is such an important aspect, the second most important aspect of what an early stage company should be considering.
So to follow on that question a bit, for the for the early stage companies out there that maybe this is their first time, what's the danger involved in having too broad of an avatar?
Yeah, I think it's the same old phrase. It is a vanilla. Um, for me, the most important thing when I speak to companies, and what I also see in the sales process, is to disqualify your imperfect client. Now, it takes a bit of nerves and some confidence to be able to niche down and repel a significant percentage of people who might have heard of you, might have heard of your company, your product. But in actual fact, that's the most important thing which you can possibly do, because those people, whether they intend to or not, waste your time or waste a business's time, or waste a business's energy. And the reason being is that I like to describe it that if you can niche down, it feels like you're decreasing from like a football pitch to a small door, right? It was like, hey, if my product can serve 10 million people, then I've got a lot of people, right? But you might actually find that 99% of those are not your perfect clients. So it feels that you're constricting. But the power of really nailing and being very specific about your avatar is you walk through that small door and it actually opens up into another football pitch. But that football pitch is actually full of the spectators who you actually want to speak to and who want to speak to you. So that is often people become quite nervous about the concept of disqualifying or repelling people, but it's actually a very, very, very important aspect within a successful marketing, and that also goes on into the sales process as well.
So does that then also apply to people that are going up before groups of angel investors and venture capitalists looking for funding for a business? Is that really something that investors are looking to see if you've already defined your avatar well?
Absolutely, Mike. I mean, it is really a foundational step in creating a product or service. Now, we've all heard those stories of people putting in a lot of time, a lot of money, even getting investment from angels for a product which might sound a great idea. They maybe pitched it well, but when the product's launched, it's a total flop. And that's really because there's been no product research, but there's also been no development of the avatar. So what the angels and the investors are looking for, one of the strong aspects of the research is, who are you speaking to? And they find that people who can't directly tell them that in like a succinct and short way have not done the work. So they haven't done that foundational step. So what other foundational step haven't they done? And it's all very well for them to have done a lot of tech stuff, perhaps, or all of those sort of things. But again, without a clear idea of who they're speaking to and how they're going to speak to that avatar, and where the best platform is to communicate. So if you come into into an investor pitch with that area very, very clear, it shows you have done a high level of research.
Wow, I think that might be create some cognitive dissonance for many people. This concept almost sounds backwards. It sounds counterintuitive that actually really narrowing down the front end and sort of dealing with what is perceived as opportunity cost, right? It's the idea that instead of reaching out to a gazillion people, I'm going to narrow it down and reach out to maybe 50 or 100 to begin with, to go through that narrow door to get to the big audience on the other side. What are some tricks or some things people can do to actually do that, to overcome that? I assume most people have a mental resistance to narrowing down on the front end.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, again, my first mentor, Edmund Pagan, he was a great one for counter-intuitiveness, if that's a phrase. But being counter-intuitive, that was one of his cornerstones for really launching a successful product. And also the great J. Abraham, one of his famous quotes is, "Everything is a test." So really, it's like, if I can launch this, and this is really what the angels and the investors want to see. They also want proof of product, right, or proof of service. So again, if you're pitching an unproven widget with a vague or not a very clear, with an unclear idea of your client, then that just isn't going to gain the interest or the traction or the investment. But if you can go to them with a clear, proven avatar and a proven a proof of product, a proof of service, by actually having had revenue created from 20, 50, 100 as a test, and then that test has been completed, that to them means far more than someone who goes in, thinks that they're the best since sliced bread, but there's not that. Again, it goes back to that foundational work completed.
So some sales, being able to prove that you've sold your product or service is really crucial to presenting to these kinds of folks. Okay, well, we've got about a couple more minutes here. So this is a part of the show we'd like to ask you some pre-submitted questions. I had one person ask what it was really like in Mongolia. Another person has asked if it's really true that your parents knew some of the old Hammer movie film stars or ran into them from time to time. And third question is, what is wrong with the Birmingham accent? That comes from one of our local Austin musicians here, wanted to know the answer to that question.
Oh, maybe I'll start with question 3. What is wrong with it? I know that you have a friend who is a great singer and a great musician on the Austin scene, and although she has a very broad Brummy accent, you would never guess right, because she sings those more sort of traditional blues. So what is wrong with it? Well, there's I would actually say that from a music point of view, there's probably nothing wrong with it. Ozzy Osbourne, Tony Iommi, Robert Plant, I believe. There's probably quite a list of people who came from that neck of the woods. It's really people like me who are from the south of England who have a trouble understanding it, and so we like to poke fun at the Brummy accent. The first question: what's it like over in Mongolia? What I found, so I was there 20 odd years ago, and I actually managed to travel around because the urban population had a very strong connection to the rural population. So if you found out that Mike wanted to go and see his aunt, his mum, his grandmother out in the sticks, they'd be more than happy for you to jump in their Jeep and contribute to the fuel costs. Then once you arrived at Aunt Jane's yurt, the family there, then there would always be people there who maybe hadn't, and maybe there's a guy there called Fred, and he hadn't seen his mate over a couple of valleys away, and there were people like me who go, "Hey, do you want to guide me around this area for a week or two. And he'd go, yeah, sure. You just pay me X, Y, Z. And on the way, we always got to meet his mates and his aunt. So to summarize, it's a very, very big country, big landscapes, very, very tough people, but very hospitable, and very strong community and family connections. And that would be my biggest underlying or overarching memory. Absolutely. And what was the third one, Mike?
This one of our listeners, Carl from I think he's from the same part of England as you. He's over from Kent. He's quite the fan of the Hammer films, the old Hammer horror movies.
Hammer films. Yeah. So
some rumor that your parents knew some of these people.
Yeah. So Peter Cushing, he was a local to a seaside town called Whitstable. I'm not sure whether he was born and bred there, but he certainly lived there for decades and retired there. My mum was a veterinary surgeon in Whitstable for 20 years, and I know that she treated, I can't remember whether it was his cats or dogs, but she met him on a number of occasions. Charming gentleman. And then the end of that funny story is that myself and my dad, we went back to Whitstable probably 3 or 4 years ago, and we're walking along the front, and we saw his house. Sadly, he passed away, I don't know, 20 years ago now, perhaps 15 years ago. And there was a historical plaque on the front. And I wanted to go around and sort of sneak in the window. So, because it was looking empty. It looked a bit sort of as if it had seen sort of better days. So we were thinking that it was kept in a family trust or something, right? So we went around then back and knocked on the door, and no one was there, and then we were just leaving. We just left his back garden out the back gate, and we saw this person walking down towards us, and it turned out that was the current owner, and he wasn't pleased. Now he's just been snooping around. So there we go.
So you and your dad were snooping, trying to look and potentially get in an empty house owned by a famous guy. The current owner happened to be coming by. That's hilarious. All right, James, thank you very much for your time. How do people get a hold of you? Are you available if people want to connect with you in some way?
Absolutely, Mike. jrbriscall@gmail.com, and my little passion project, my side project, is to really help entrepreneurs embrace their hero's journey, the story within themselves. So jamesbriscall.com is a way to communicate with me, and also reads about my written articles and published articles there.
All right. Well, this is Mike and James wrapping up. Just remind everybody our job at Capital Finders is to help you get out there and get the capital you need for your business. And we do some work with James as far as helping you with tightening up the avatar and that kind of thing. But hope that this podcast was helpful for you. If you have any questions for future guests, let us know. Just click on the link below.